The morning did not arrive so much as it forgave. Light slipped between the curtains of Adrian's condo in a way that made silence feel intentional, like a pause a pianist takes before touching the first key. Elena stood in that light with both hands over her lower stomach, as if tenderness could be taught by touch. The test on the bathroom counter had decided, quietly, that the future would not wait for courage to catch up. 2 lines faint as pencil, stubborn as fate. When the door opened, Adrian didn't speak. He set his phone, his keys, the thin metal of his day onto the entry table, each object clicking like punctuation. He saw the look on her face, the way her body had turned into a small shelter around something new. And he didn't ask for proof. He crossed the room and took her hand to his chest, the way some men pray. "Tell me it's true," he said. She couldn't, not yet. Words would make the day too real, would summon names and arrangements, and the old fear of being taken care of only as a debt. "If it is," he went on, voice low, "we do this together, not a promise, a position." The clock on the kitchen wall clicked once, and she nodded. "It is." Something in his shoulders released. He did not rush to solutions or calendars. He simply breathed her name once, Elena, as if rewriting its definition. They did practical things then, because love that intends to last knows how to behave. He called his doctor. She sat and let the room learn a new geometry with her at the center. He brought her water, remembered too late that it should be room temperature, and she smiled at the smallness of his mistake. When fear rose, it rose like a tide, not a storm, gradual, patient, almost kind. By afternoon, he had made another decision. The Cole mansion, with its glass stairs and disciplined roses and echoes that had been trained to behave, would be the place he brought her, not as a guest, not as a complication he was brave enough to name, but as family. He didn't tell her on the drive. The city peeled away in sheet steel, then older brick, then the wide lawn emptiness wealth prefers. When the iron gate recognized his car and began to pull its mouth into a welcome, Elena finally looked at him. "Are we?" "Yes," he said. "If I ask you, you'll prepare. If I don't, you'll be yourself. Is that good?" "It's the truth," he said, and smiled like a man unlearning power. Grace was already waiting. Some mothers practice their composure until it calcifies. Grace had simply chosen a softer steel. She stood at the top of the steps, the afternoon behind her, turning her into an outline of who she'd been when the house was louder, when little feet had taught the floors where to creak. For a breath, no one moved. Elena couldn't read the room because the room refused to be read. Money puts a lacquer over emotion that looks like calm. Then Grace descended, each step measured not by distance, but by decision. She stopped close enough to smell the shy citrus of Elena's shampoo and said, not unkindly, "If you are to marry my son, you should practice calling me by the right name, Mrs. Cole," Elena said, a reflex learned by girls who are careful. Grace did not correct her. She studied the face, the bones beneath it, a shadow at the jaw that memory tried to color in. She offered her hand the way people do when they mean to invite and evaluate at the same time. "Come in," she said. "We'll sit." They sat. Daniel arrived with the noise of a man who uses humor to make doorways wider. He stalled at the threshold when he saw Elena, and then grinned as if being introduced to a plot twist. "Well," he said, "we're starting with honesty for once." At dinner, the table held itself like a photograph. Crystal that could catch a candle and hold it hostage. Silver that remembered the weight of more formal nights. Grace poured water for Elena first, then herself. A choreography so gentle it might have been an accident if it hadn't been exactly on purpose. Adrian did not make speeches. He looked at his mother and said, "I'm getting married." With whom, she asked. "To buy a breath." "With Elena." Names are doors. This one opened something no one had walked through in years. Elena lowered her eyes to the plate. The first bite tasted expensive and kind. She ate slowly because pacing is how you teach your body not to panic. When Grace asked a soft question about work radio, the way voice can cradle the dark, Elena answered in full, because some women have only ever been able to tell the truth when someone lets them finish a sentence. Halfway through the meal, Grace put her napkin down. "You're carrying," she said, not as a test, but as a recognition two women can share without proof. "I wore that look once." Elena's spoon clinked. She didn't deny it. She let her hand rest where it had rested all day, the way one protects a flame when the hallway drafts. "Then we should not waste time," Grace said. She did not add because life has already wasted enough of ours. After dessert, the house took them into its quieter rooms. Adrian moved with a gentleness he had never asked of himself. Power has its own gravity, and he felt it shift away from the corner office and toward the couch where Elena leaned back and felt, for the first time in months, that furniture might hold. He knelt Adrian Cole, who'd been taught that the world is safer when it looks up at you, and tied the laces of her flats because she had admitted the stairs had taken more out of her than pride could replace. When night came, the mansion learned their breathing. In the guest room, made ready so quickly, it had the dignity of a plan. Elena lay awake and counted the quiets. The one right after the HVAC clicks off. The one before a branch remembers to brush the window. The one that belongs only to a person who has never been allowed to imagine being kept. Morning made the house honest. Sun found the piano that had been closed for years and insisted on turning it into a promise again. Grace walked Elena through the garden and showed her how roses are punished into beauty. Elena nodded and made a private decision to plant something that didn't have to be corrected to bloom. They went shopping because ritual, not need, is what mothers use to build bridges. In a small boutique where the lighting forgave mirrors, Grace guided Elena's arm back and up and pulled the zipper along the spine of a pale dress meant for the weeks before a woman is obviously expecting. The moment could have been ordinary. It was not. As the zipper reached the soft hollow below the neck, Grace's fingers went still, a mark, small as a raindrop, placed by the same careless God who had once given and then abandoned his own idea. Grace didn't gasp. She swallowed the room back down her throat and said, in a voice that had learned diplomacy as a survival skill, "Does it fit?" "It does," Elena said, meeting her eyes in the mirror and seeing, just for a blink, someone else's memory standing behind her. The drive home was an essay in restraint. Grace kept both hands on the wheel. She did not ask. Questions would break her. Answers would require a language grief had never learned to conjugate. In her study, where the air was trained to stay still, she opened a drawer and took out the album she had taught herself not to open. Page 1. A toddler with a grin too big for the face holding it. A small birthmark like a teardrop, left of center at the nape. The caption, written in a hand that had trembled less back then, Elena Grace Cole, 2 years old. The phone call to the lab used the other voice, the one that doesn't beg. She collected a strand of hair from a brush, an old trick mothers learn when they cannot bear to ask, and wrote a name that wasn't hers on the form, because truth can sometimes only survive if it wears a disguise. 3 nights. The house pretended nothing had changed. Adrian managed his day like a man splitting wood, deliberate, clean, relieved to be doing something honest with force. Daniel tried not to make jokes that belonged in easier hours. Elena helped the kitchen staff chop herbs and ask people's names until names became people again. When the envelope arrived, it felt heavier than paper. Grace locked the door. She cut cleanly along the fold and read with a steadiness that would have impressed a jury. Probability of maternity, 19.99%. She sat before her body could decide to fall. She held the page to her chest, the way a woman holds a telegram, telling her a train that was never meant to arrive has pulled into the station, whistling like a second chance. Evening fell like a curtain instead of a sky. Grace walked to the living room where Elena had fallen asleep, sitting upright. A book slipping from her hand like a child who trusts the couch. Grace knelt. She wanted to memorize the map of the face before she changed the name of the country. Elena, she said. The woman woke the way women who've had to defend their waking do. Careful, ready. She saw the paper in Grace's hand and tried to stand before remembering she didn't have to. Grace sat beside her. It took less than a sentence to cross 22 years. I should have known the first time I saw you, Grace said. And then, because there are words that remove the distance between strangers with one use. My daughter, Elena did not believe and then believed all at once. Belief is a cliff. You either fall or you don't. Tears did the arithmetic for her. She folded into the space Grace made, a space that had learned how to wait without emptying itself out. They cried like women who did not need to be brave while sobbing. Adrian watched from the doorway and didn't enter, because some reunions are prayers, and some men know not to speak during the holiest part. He saw how Grace's hand found the back of Elena's head with the muscle memory of a lullaby. He saw how grief and relief can inhabit the same face and not cancel each other out. Later, when the lights were turned down to the dim that tells a house to stop performing, Elena stood at a window and looked out at the dark that had made room for them. I didn't know it could feel like this, she said when Adrian joined her. Like what? Like the world decided to put something back. He took her hand. Then let's build around it. They told Daniel the next morning in the kitchen, because kitchens are where people learn to be honest together over coffee that is either too strong or too weak, but never quite wrong. Daniel cried without apology and hugged both women at once, awkward and perfect, and promised out loud to be the kind of uncle who remembers birthdays and the color of favorite backpacks. Grace took Elena to her study and opened a small velvet box that had waited like a lighthouse light, small, stubborn, spinning toward a ship that did not know it was already steering home. Inside rested a gold locket engraved E.G. C. The clasp was slightly bent, the way time leaves its handwriting on metal. You wore it the day you disappeared, Grace said. I bought it back from a pawn shop in Dallas 5 years later. I thought if I held on long enough, it might have a throat to hang from again. Elena touched it with the kind of reverence that does not belong to religion, but lives just adjacent. It's heavy, she said. It's yours, Grace answered. Some weights are a way of saying stay. By afternoon, the house had been rearranged not in furniture, but in feeling. Staff moved as if carrying air that might shatter. Adrian asked Elena if she wanted to call Annabelle, and she did. And the call took the shape of laughter that tripped into sobbing, and back again, women who had shared broken nights allowing themselves, for once, to share a whole morning. When sunset slid its long hand across the lawn, Adrian brought Elena outside. The garden had done its work. Even the roses that had been shamed into their best behavior smelled like mercy. He knelt not because tradition insists, but because some promises only fit in a posture that remembers humility, not because of the child. He said, "Because of you. Because I have spent a life choosing the right risks and the wrong distances. And this is neither. This is the close I keep." He held out a ring that did not need to prove anything, a thin band, simple, built to be worn by a woman who uses her hands. She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, and then added, because she wanted the truth to stay full. "I would have said yes, even if nothing else had found us." From across the street, where jealousy rents small apartments, a phone camera clicked. The photo traveled the short digital distance to a number saved under violet, and a smirk formed in a room that smelled like hairspray and ambition. Fairy tales have villains because stories need gravity. Real life has wounded girls who confuse fire with light. Inside the gate, where grace had chosen to be plural, Elena pressed her forehead to Adrian's and let the future write its first clean sentence. "We will." The envelope had not yet cooled from Grace's hands when the world began rearranging itself. That night, the Cole mansion felt less like a house and more like a body, each corridor an artery carrying shock, each whisper a pulse trying to remember its rhythm. Elena didn't sleep. Joy had shape-shifted into something quieter, closer to disbelief. For years, she had tried to make sense of the cruelty of being unwanted. Now she was learning the equal cruelty of being loved too late. Morning came gently, as if afraid of waking the wrong memory. Grace insisted that breakfast be taken together, a gesture that to outsiders might have seemed formal. But within these walls was an offering. The table glowed with polished silver. Daniel poured orange juice for everyone, the way children pour peace between adults. Adrian watched Elena closely, his gaze softer than sunlight through blinds. Grace broke the silence. "Last night wasn't a dream," she said, "and if it was, I don't wish to wake from it." Her voice trembled once, then steadied. 22 years ago, I lost my child. The police found a car at the edge of the lake, but no body. I told myself that absence was mercy, that maybe she'd been found, raised, loved. Elena listened, spoon frozen midair. Grace reached across the table, palm open, and here you are, my proof that prayers have strange schedules. No one corrected her. There was no need. Daniel looked down, whispering, "So that's why you kept the pink room all these years." Grace smiled faintly. "Some things are too painful to change." and too sacred to erase. Elena's eyes filled, but she blinked them clear. Then I wasn't abandoned, she said softly, just misplaced. By noon, the story had traveled through the estate like perfume soft, lingering, undeniable. Staff members smiled when she passed, with the hesitant reverence reserved for miracles that walk. Adrian found her in the music room, tracing a finger along the edge of the piano keys. "You look like her," he said. "Your mother?" He nodded, the way she looks when she forgives something that isn't ready to be forgiven. Elena pressed a key. The note quivered, sustained, vanished. "I don't know how to be anyone's daughter again." He leaned against the frame, half in light, half in thought. "Then start by being exactly who you are. The rest will follow, even if I'm not ready to forgive the past." "Especially then," he said it simply, but the words held a tenderness that made her heart ache. In the afternoon, Grace's lawyer arrived with documents, formalities. He called them legal recognitions, inheritance adjustments, the polite machinery of family restored. Elena sat beside Grace, watching the lawyer's pen glide across paper like a needle closing an old wound. Her name appeared in bold, Elena Grace Cole. Her breath caught. Grace noticed. "You were always meant to have that name." The pen hovered above the signature line for a heartbeat. Elena hesitated, not out of doubt, but awe. Then she signed, her hand steady. The room exhaled. Adrian touched her shoulder. "Welcome home." "Officially," Grace whispered. "Welcome back, my heart." Later that week, the Cole family held a small dinner. No press, no announcement, just family. Daniel toasted clumsily, but sweetly, to the sister I never knew I had, and the woman who managed to outstubborn both my mother and brother. Laughter softened the grandeur of the room. Adrian's eyes lingered on Elena, pride hidden beneath restraint. After dinner, they walked through the garden again. The night air smelled of rain and soil, a reminder that even wealth can't perfume away nature. "You don't have to marry me because of the child," Elena said quietly, breaking the hush. He stopped. "I'm not." "Then why now?" "Because time has stopped pretending to be infinite." He looked at her, his voice bare. "And because I want to build something that doesn't require either of us to keep apologizing for being who we are." Her reply was a whisper. "And if I fail you, then we'll fail together, with grace." But peace never lingers without rent. The next morning, Adrian's assistant forwarded an anonymous email, a grainy photo of his proposal in the garden. tagged with the words, "Every fairy tale costs someone their truth." Attached was a second photo, Elena, years younger, leaving a shelter. The timestamp read 10 years ago. He closed the laptop slowly, jaw tightening. The past had found its way into the present. Elena entered moments later, humming faintly. "Good morning," she said, before seeing his face. "What happened?" He hesitated. Then he turned the screen toward her, color drained from her cheeks. "That's before. When I had nothing, I know." Her voice trembled. "Does it matter to you now?" He shook his head. "Only if it still matters to you, it does," she said, eyes wet. "Because every time something good happens, I wait for it to be taken away." Adrian closed the laptop and took her hand. "Then let me be the one thing that stays." Meanwhile, across town, Lydia, formerly known as the jealous colleague, watched the same leaked photos on her phone. The glow of the screen carved her face into irony. She poured herself another glass of wine, fingers trembling. "So he marries her and forgets me. After all the years I cleaned up his messes." Her reflection in the window answered nothing, but anger always invents its own audience. By midnight, she had already forwarded the images to an online tabloid. Headlines have hunger. This one would feed well. Grace found Elena later that evening, sitting by the nursery window, the room once pink, now repainted in softer tones of sage and cream. "You're quiet," Grace said. "I'm thinking about everything I almost didn't have." Grace sat beside her. "And what is that? A name? A family? A chance?" Grace smiled. "You had all of those. You were just walking toward them the long way around." Elena exhaled shakily. "What if I'm not ready to be someone's mother?" Grace took her hand. "Then be her heart first. The rest will come naturally." Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks. "Thank you for not hating me for being lost." Grace's reply was soft and infinite. "You can't hate what you've been praying for." That night, the rain returned. It began as a whisper against the windows, then deepened into something steady, like memory replaying itself. Elena stood at the balcony, the scent of petrichor curling around her. Adrian joined her, wrapping a shawl over her shoulders. "Everything's changing too fast," she said. "Then we slow it down." "How?" He looked at her belly, at the life neither of them had planned, but both had begun to protect, by choosing what to keep. Lightning rippled across the horizon, illuminating their faces for a single, suspended frame. Her vulnerability, his resolve, the shared awareness that love, when it comes after ruin, demands more courage than innocence ever could. The sky over the Cole estate woke first. Pale gold spilled across the marble halls, touching every bouquet, every silver ribbon that staff had arranged overnight. The house smelled of lilies and rain, the scent of promises. Elena sat in front of the mirror, motionless, her wedding veil cascading like a waterfall of light. A makeup artist hovered nearby, but there wasn't much to fix. She looked less like a bride preparing and more like a woman remembering. Annabelle arrived early, clutching coffee and chaos in equal measure. "You look terrifyingly calm," she said. "I'm not calm," Elena answered. "I'm surrendered." "Same thing," Annabelle smiled. "Surrender looks good on you." Across the hall, Adrian adjusted his cufflinks. Daniel teased from the doorway. Still time to run. Adrian's reflection smiled, but his voice was steady. "I stopped running the day she stopped apologizing for surviving." By noon, sunlight had conquered every shadow. A string quartet began the slow climb of Pachelbel's canon. Guests rose as Elena appeared, one hand on Grace's arm. Every step she took was a rebellion against everything that once tried to break her. The aisle stretched like time long, necessary, unforgiving. At the altar, Adrian waited, expression unreadable except for the faint tremor at his jaw. When her hand met his, the music faded into heartbeat. "Do you, Adrian Cole, take Elena?" "I already do," he said quietly, before the officiant could finish. Laughter rippled through the room, soft and forgiving. "And do you, Elena?" "I do," she whispered, "for all the wrong turns that led me here." Applause erupted. Grace wiped her eyes discreetly. For a moment, the world held still, an entire lifetime condensed into a single exhale. But peace, like champagne, always invites someone to spill it. Mid-reception, a murmur spread across the crowd. At the far end of the hall, a woman stood in the doorway, older, frailer, wearing a faded dress that didn't belong among silk and crystal. Beth, the mother who had sold her child for money and survival. Beside her, a man with trembling hands, Michael, the brother who had once protected Elena, now thin as guilt. The chatter dimmed. Grace's smile faltered, but didn't fall. Adrian moved instinctively closer to his wife. Beth's voice cracked the silence. "I didn't come to ruin this. I came to say I'm sorry." Elena froze. Words scraped the back of her throat, but refused to form. Beth continued, "I thought I was saving myself. I didn't know I was losing my soul." Her eyes glistened. "If I had treated you kindly, maybe I could have been invited, not crashing in, Michael placed a shaking hand on her shoulder. She's telling the truth. Lena. Elena's reply was soft but sharp enough to draw blood. Truth, this late still cuts. Adrian touched her wrist, not to stop her, but to remind her she didn't have to bleed alone. Grace stepped forward. "This is not a courtroom," she said gently. "It's a wedding. If you came seeking forgiveness, it can be given, but not demanded." Beth sank to her knees, whispering, "I just wanted to see her happy once." Elena swallowed hard. "Then look. But don't ask me to forget the price." The room exhaled collectively, an ache passing from body to body like incense. Later, when guests began to dance again, Elena slipped to the balcony. Her hands trembled around the rail. The air was cold enough to sting. Grace joined her quietly. "You did the right thing," she said. "Did I sounded cruel. You sounded human." Below them, fairy lights blinked like patient constellations. Sometimes, Grace continued, "The only way to close a wound is to see the person who made it bleed and still choose not to reopen it." Elena leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I used to dream of her begging for forgiveness. Now that she did, it feels empty." "That's healing," Grace said simply. "It never feels like victory, just peace disguised as nothing." Inside, Adrian searched for his wife. When he found her at the balcony, he wrapped her in his coat without a word. "Let them talk," he murmured. "Let them all talk. You're home now." But not every ghost knows when to leave. A week after the wedding, Adrian was reviewing contracts when his secretary announced a visitor. "Lydia?" She entered without invitation. Perfume first, remorse second. "I'm not here to apologize," she began. "I'm here to warn you. People are talking about her, about the baby, about the photos." Adrian didn't look up. "Let them. She's not who you think." He cut her off. "She's exactly who I think she is. That's the problem for you, isn't it?" Lydia's voice shook. "You're making a mistake." Adrian finally met her gaze. "No, I'm correcting one." The conversation ended with the soft click of a door and the louder silence of a man who had chosen his loyalty. That night, he told Elena about the visit. She listened, calm. "She's still hurting," she said. "I know," Adrian replied, "but pain doesn't give her visiting rights." Elena smiled faintly. "You've gotten better at boundaries." "You taught me," he said. Months later, tragedy tried once more. Anna received a frantic call. Violet, her sister by fate, not by affection, had shown up at the restaurant where Elena volunteered. drunk and desperate. By the time she arrived, chaos had bloomed. Violet was shouting, overturning tables, flanked by two men who looked like trouble sculpted into muscle. Adrian arrived minutes later, fury disguised as calm. "Enough," he said, stepping between them. One of the men sneered. "Who the hell are you?" "Her husband," Adrian answered. Before the punch landed, the fight was quick but brutal. Chairs splintering, glass shattering, the smell of rain-soaked asphalt creeping in from outside. Elena screamed his name. He turned just in time to see Violet stumble, tears streaking mascara. "I just wanted what she has," Violet cried, pointing at Elena. "Love, a family, anything." Sirens sliced through the night. The men were handcuffed first, Violet next. Elena watched as her sister was led away, whispering through tears. "It didn't have to be this way." Violet's reply was raw. "Maybe it always did." The following morning, news channels replayed the chaos under headlines like Adrian Cole Industries defends wife in restaurant brawl. Grace handled the press with the poise of a queen cleaning up after a storm. In private, Elena couldn't stop shaking. "She could have killed you," she said. Adrian took her hands, bruised knuckles hidden beneath his palms. "I've been through worse battles. None of them were worth fighting like this one." That night, Beth appeared again, smaller now, fragile as guilt. She fell to her knees before Elena. "Please," she sobbed, "help your sister. She'll die in prison." Elena stared at her. The anger was gone. What remained was exhaustion. "Do you even remember the day you sold me?" Beth's tears blurred the carpet. "I remember the hunger that made me forget love." Elena closed her eyes. "I've already paid that debt. I can't pay it twice." Beth's voice broke. "Then I'll go myself." She stumbled out into the rain before anyone could stop her. Hours later, police called she had collapsed on a back road. Heart failure. Elena listened without moving. Grace wrapped her arms around her daughter as if trying to protect her from life itself. "Some storms don't wait for forgiveness," Grace whispered. Days turned into weeks. Grief and gratitude shared the same room. Adrian's injuries healed. Violet faced sentencing. And the world, cruelly consistent, kept spinning. One evening, Elena stood by the nursery again, her belly round with life. Adrian entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "She'd want you to forgive her," he said. "I already did," Elena replied, "but forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the fire." He nodded, kissed her forehead. "You're stronger than you think." "I had to be." "You don't get to choose your pain, only what it turns you into." Weeks later, at a charity gala, a journalist asked Elena how it felt to marry into power. She smiled politely. "I didn't marry power. I married peace, and I'm still learning how to keep it." The quote made headlines the next day. Grace framed it in her study. That night, Elena found Adrian on the balcony, city lights flickering like candles for no one in particular. "Do you ever regret any of it?" she asked. He shook his head. "Regret is a luxury for people who never had to fight for happiness." She leaned into him. "We fought a lot. And somehow," he said, resting his hand on her stomach, "we won." The morning after the storm did not begin with alarms. It began with papers white as surrender, sharp as consequence, on the kitchen island. A stack of legal forms waited beside a bowl of pears no one would touch. Adrian unwrapped the gauze from his knuckles and redid it with the surgeon's patience. Elena warmed her hands on a mug she wasn't drinking. The house moved quietly around them. As if grief were a sleeping child, everyone was trying not to wake. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I'm still going." He nodded. That was the promise they had chosen. Not comfort, but company. They drove to the precinct with the windows cracked to let in the cold. The parking lot smelled of rain and metal. Inside, the lobby was the color of fluorescent honesty. Nothing to hide. Everything too bright. Ona gave her statement in a voice that remembered to breathe at the end of each sentence. She did not clean the past or decorate it. She set it down the way you set down heavy groceries carefully, with the hope nothing breaks on the way to the counter. When the officer slid the finished report to her, she signed and then asked, "May I see her?" A pause, a look toward a supervisor, a small nod. Violet waited behind glass that made people look like versions of themselves they didn't choose. Her mascara had surrendered. Her mouth had learned a new shape for quiet. Elena picked up the phone, the cord curling like a question between them. "I didn't come to hurt you," Violet said first. Her voice cracked. "I came because everything I am is a hallway you learned to run through. You came," Elena answered, "because pain is loud when it thinks it's been ignored." Violet tried to laugh and failed. "You have nice words now." "No," Elena said. "I have the same words. I just finally get to finish them." They stared at each other the way mirrors do when they're not sure which image to keep. "I wanted what you have," Violet whispered. "Not the house, not the ring, the look on your face when someone loves you without needing you to pay." Elena swallowed. "You could have asked for help." "I did," Violet said, and for a second she was a child again, lip trembling, palms empty, not with words, with damage. The truth landed between them like a seat no one wanted to take. "What happens now?" Violet asked. Consequences, Elena said. And then if you choose it, work. Violet's eyes searched hers, desperate for something softer. Do you forgive me? I don't know yet, Elena said, and did not flinch at her own honesty. But I don't want to hate you. That's a beginning. The phone clicked back into its cradle with the politeness of an ending. Back at the mansion, the day unfolded like a slow apology. Grace met them in the foyer, reading their faces with a mother's effortless literacy. She touched Adrian's wrapped hand, then Elena's shoulder, then did the only liturgy that ever really helps. She made soup. In the small dining room, the one with the family photos and the less expensive plates, steam rose like mercy. Your body will remember stress longer than your mind, Grace said, ladling. Eat, even if you can't taste. Elena did. Halfway through the second spoonful, a sob ambushed her. She laughed mid-cry, the way people do when their insides are trying to agree on tone. Grace reached across the table and covered her hand. Forgiveness isn't a favor you grant the person who hurt you, she said. It's the passport you stamp so you can leave a country you were never meant to live in. Elena nodded, tears cooling into salt on her tongue. I keep wanting tidy endings. That's for books, Grace said. Real life gives you thresholds. Step across, even if you're limping. The call from the hospital came near dusk. Beth, foster mother, architect of 1,000 small undoings, had collapsed on a back road. Her heart choosing silence mid-apology. Elena listened, face neutral with shock, and said the words adults say when the past demands etiquette. We'll come. Hospitals are always the same antiseptic air. Televisions debating sports. No one in the waiting room is watching. A plant in the corner that has learned how to thrive on fluorescent attention. A nurse led them down a corridor that had carried both joy and endings and opened a door that knew the difference. Beth lay very still, unmade by exhaustion and a life that had traded tenderness for survival. Her hands were folded in an approximation of prayer. Elena approached to the edge of the bed and found herself counting freckles the way children count stars. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come with tears, only with the knowledge that a chapter has closed, and you were never going to like its last paragraph. I wanted a better goodbye, Elena said softly. Adrian stood behind her, a hand at her back, steady as architecture. Grace moved to the other side and adjusted the sheet. Because mothers fix what they can reach. A chaplain stepped in, all gentle edges. Would you like me to say something? Elena shook her head. I'll do it. She cleared her throat and spoke in the voice that once read news into midnight. the voice that had held strangers through storms they couldn't name. "Thank you for the shelter you could give," she said. "I forgive the love you didn't know how to make. I will not hand this wound to my child. Rest." It wasn't poetry. It was permission. They signed what people sign when the living have said enough and the dead have finished speaking. Outside, the night had the expensive shine of rain on blacktop. They stood in it without umbrellas, letting the water decide who they would be when they walked back inside. The funeral was small, and that was mercy. Michael came, clutching a hat with both hands. Everything about him an apology he didn't know how to deliver. She did what she could. He said at the graveside, voice wind-torn. It was never enough. Elena squeezed his arm. "We'll learn to let that sentence end without blame." He nodded, and something in his shoulders lowered, as if a verdict had been postponed indefinitely. Afterward, in the church basement with bad coffee and better cookies, an old neighbor hugged Elena longer than manners require and whispered, "Sometimes you don't get the mother you deserve. Sometimes you become her." Elena carried the sentence home like a talisman. Lydia returned as bad news does uninvited, punctual. She waited in the lobby of the Cole Industries, half sober, half sincere, rehearsing her lines to a potted fern. "I'm here to apologize," she told Adrian when he arrived, "and to warn you." "You've already warned me," he said, "that you will trade anyone's privacy for your turn at the microphone." Her cheeks flushed. "He used me," she said, meaning the past, meaning power, meaning every man who had promised visibility and delivered a backstage pass instead. "I won't argue with your pain," Adrian replied, "but I won't let it build a home in my house." She looked at him as if there might be a version of the conversation where he thanked her for trying. There wasn't. Security did not need to touch her. She left on her own, shoulders squared like a person pretending a hallway is a runway. Elena watched the elevator numbers descend. "She's not our villain," she said later, when Adrian told her, "She's just a mirror with bad lighting." "Mirrors still break things," he answered, "even when they don't mean to." The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and the kind of justice that arrives with a payment plan. Violet sat at the defense table in a blouse that had learned modesty overnight. Her hands were clean, her eyes less so. Michael testified carefully. The restaurant manager testified angrily. A detective testified in the voice civil servants use when they bring order to chaos and hope someone thanks them. When it was Elena's turn, she stood and told the truth without ornament. The fight, the fear, the pregnancy, the knowledge that history loves a loop. She did not look at Violet when she spoke. She looked at the judge, at the seal on the wall, at the clock pretending to be impartial. Do you want her punished? The prosecutor asked on redirect. I want her interrupted. Elena said, punishment is a circle, interruption is a door. A murmur moved through the gallery like wind through wheat. The judge asked for quiet and then for a recess. In the hallway, reporters sharpened their pens. Daniel blocked them with a grin and a body built for interference. When the gavel finally returned order to the room, the judge delivered a sentence that sounded like mercy, translated into bureaucracy, supervised probation, mandatory counseling, community service that required getting up early. Violet nodded. A small, exhausted motion that looked for once like agreement with the reality she had helped write. As the bailiff moved to escort her out, Violet turned her head just enough to find Elena in the aisle. Thank you, she mouthed. Elena didn't smile. She lifted her chin a fraction. The international sign for go, do the work. Their therapist's office had soft chairs and a rug that forgave shoes. Elena and Adrian sat angled toward each other, knees almost touching the geometry of two people who had learned that distance is a choice, not a fate. You've survived crisis together, the therapist said. Now learn ordinary. It's harder. Adrian exhaled. How? Practice, the therapist answered. Choose small rituals and guard them like treasure. Ordinary is how love becomes weather instead of fireworks. So they did. They picked Tuesday night pasta and Friday morning walks. The slow stacking of minutes that builds a home where apologies and anniversaries use the same front door. Adrian learned to ask before fixing. Elena learned to receive without itemizing the cost. They started naming the baby Peanut and then laughing. Starling. Because starlings know how to turn together without colliding. On a Thursday, no different from the others, except that it was theirs. Elena woke to the light coming sideways across the bed and felt the first unmistakable flutter, a tiny wing against her palm. She took Adrian's hand and placed it where certainty had just happened. Did you feel? He nodded, eyes wide. The boardroom emptied out of him. Yes. They lay there for a long time, saying nothing, letting the future practice being present. The memorial for Beth was simple. A small chapel on a hill that liked to keep the sky for itself. No eulogies, only a guest book where people could write one true sentence. Elena wrote, I will not repeat what hurt you into me. Michael wrote, good night. A neighbor wrote, you taught us to stretch groceries to Friday. We'll keep that. At the back of the chapel, Adrian lit a candle and did not name what it was for. Grace took Elena's arm as they walked out, squeezing once before letting go. You did a hard thing with a clean heart, she said. Elena looked out over the parking lot and then beyond it. where a lake caught the afternoon like a secret and kept it. I don't feel triumphant, she said. You won't, Grace replied. Healing is mostly paperwork and naps. They laughed, and it sounded like a door closing gently because someone cared what the hinge felt. In the nursery that used to be a museum for grief, paint had finally dried, sage on the walls, light wood for the crib, a mobile of tiny paper cranes that turned the ceiling into a soft galaxy whenever the vent exhaled. On the dresser, the old locket lay beside a new sonogram, both kinds of proof that life doubles back sometimes and returns what it borrowed. That night, Elena stood in the doorway and let herself be the audience for a room that had learned how to breathe again. Adrian joined her and, without speaking, put his arm around her shoulders. Do you think we've earned this? She asked. I don't know if anyone earns peace, he said. I think you just stop arguing when it arrives. She rested her head against him. Then let's stop arguing. They stayed there until the house learned their stillness, the way it had learned their footsteps and their arguments and their laughter. Ordinary waited, patient as a fern. Outside, the sky sorted its stars and left the moon to watch the door. On the night before everything would change, though they didn't know it yet, Elena sat at her desk and wrote a letter to the child who had made her braver by requiring better maps. Little one, you will inherit stories. Some will be true. Some will be true enough to be useful. Here is ours we were lost. And then we weren't. We were hurt. And then we were still hurt, but also held. We learned that love is not a rescue. It is a room with 2 chairs and time. When the world is loud, come home. If home is loud, come to the garden. If the garden is loud, close your eyes and wait. You have my permission to rest. You are not here to fix us. We are here to grow around you, Mom. She sealed it and tucked it into the locket's velvet box. A small museum of promises waiting for the right exhibit date. From the hallway, Adrian called. You ready? She turned off the lamp and met him under the archway that had seen them as strangers, then as trouble, then as a family rehearsing its lines. He took her hand. The house clicked off its last light. In the quiet, something like dawn shifted its weight. The first light of dawn filtered through gauzy curtains, thin as forgiveness. Elena woke to the faint rhythm of waves beyond the window and the steadier rhythm beside her Adrian's breath. Deep, unguarded, human. For a moment, she didn't move. There are mornings that demand you rush back into the world, and there are mornings that ask you to stay. This one belonged to the latter. Her body had changed rounder in promise, slower in movement, yet her heart felt lighter. On the nightstand, a glass of water and a folded note waited. "Don't wake me. I finally slept, knowing you're safe." She smiled, fingertips resting on her stomach. "He's getting poetic," she murmured to the quiet. Downstairs, the house was alive with sunlight and the gentle chaos of people learning peace. Grace hummed while arranging tulips. Daniel and Michael argued softly about coffee brands. The world hadn't ended, it had rearranged. When Adrian appeared at the doorway, sleeves rolled, tie loose, Elena realized something she'd never said aloud. Love was not a rescue. It was endurance in daylight. The garden behind the Cole estate had once been a battlefield for roses and ivy. Now, under Grace's supervision, it had become a rehearsal space for joy. Elena sat beneath the pergola, notebook in hand, sketching names for the baby Liam, Emma, Noah. Adrian joined her with a tray of lemonade, her new obsession, and a look that had replaced command with curiosity. "Still undecided?" he asked. "Still human," she replied, smiling. "I want something that sounds like peace." He took the seat beside her. "Then name them after what you fought for." She looked at him, really looked at the man who once treated control as care, who now practiced softness like a new language. "I already did," she said. "Peace starts with you." Adrian chuckled, low and honest. "If that's true, the world's in trouble." "No," she said, tracing circles on his wrist. "The world's finally learning balance." Grace called from the veranda, camera in hand. "Hold still, you two." "I want one picture that doesn't look like a corporate brochure." They laughed. For the first time in years, Elena didn't feel like she was posing for anyone. Rain fell that night, soft, deliberate, the way blessings sometimes disguise themselves. The contractions began at 2:17 a.m. By 3 o'clock, the house had become a symphony of urgency, car doors, footsteps, whispered prayers. Adrian drove like a man learning faith. His hand never left hers, even when the pain made her curse every saint she'd ever heard of. At 4:32 a.m., under a pale hospital light that flickered like a nervous angel, their child arrived small, fierce, crying as if to prove existence was worth the noise. The nurse smiled. "It's a girl." Adrian froze, not with fear, but with awe. He looked at Elena, then at the tiny face pressed against her chest, and something ancient softened in him. "She has your stubbornness," he whispered. "She has your eyebrows." Elena managed, laughing through tears. Grace entered quietly, eyes glistening, holding a small blanket she had knitted for a baby she didn't know was her granddaughter. When Elena placed the infant in her arms, the world completed a circle it hadn't realized it was drawing. Grace kissed the child's forehead and whispered, "Welcome home, little one." Weeks passed in the kind of blur that only new life can cause, days measured by feedings, nights divided by lullabies and small, holy exhaustion. Elena wrote letters during the baby's naps, one to the child, one to Adrian, and one to the girl she used to be. Dear me. Age 22. You were right to leave. You were right to cry. You were right to believe there was something better. Even when every voice told you no, you found it not in fairy tales, but in work, in forgiveness, in staying gentle when the world asked you to harden. You are free now, not because the past disappeared, but because you learned to live beside it. When she finished, she folded the letters into a small wooden box and placed it beneath the crib, a keepsake of survival. That evening, Adrian came home early. He found her standing at the window, the baby asleep against her shoulder, the city stretching golden beyond the glass. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "why we had to go through all that pain just to end up here?" He stepped behind her, resting his chin on her hair. "Because some stories need to break first," he said, "so light can find the cracks." Months later, the house filled with laughter again, a birthday, a christening, a celebration of survival disguised as brunch. Daniel brought champagne, Michael brought a guitar, and Grace made the kind of pie that convinces people to believe in heaven. Elena, in a white sundress, carried her daughter into the garden where everything had begun. "Everyone," Adrian announced, "meet hope." The name rippled through the crowd, soft but absolute. Elena smiled, because that's what she gave us even before she was born. Grace held the baby up toward the light. "To new beginnings," she said. The toast followed, but Elena barely heard it. Her eyes drifted to the sky, where clouds drifted slow and kind, and she whispered a private prayer, not for safety, but for courage to keep living honestly. Night returned gently. The guests left. The garden exhaled. Adrian and Elena sat on the porch, baby asleep between them. City lights twinkling like patient stars. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. "No," he said. "It's finally starting." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then promise me one thing, anything, when the world gets loud again. You'll remind me of tonight." He looked at her, the woman who had once been a stranger in the rain and was now his compass in every storm. "I'll remind you," he said, "and I'll still be here." Silence settled, not empty, but full, the kind that means everything has finally said enough. The camera of imagination drifted outward the porch, the house, the garden, the city, the stars, all of it folding into one long, steady breath of peace. And over that still image, her voice returned, low and luminous, the same tone that began this series 5 episodes ago. Some storms don't destroy. They rearrange the sky so we can see where home really is. Sometimes, the family we lose teaches us what family means. The pain we survive teaches us how to love. And the people we meet by accident, they turn out to be the ones fate had written in from the very beginning.